The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the local media association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work of chronicling the life of blacks in New York and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News to donate. It's Monday, April 6th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. We continue our coverage of the COVID-19 outbreak with my guest psychologist, Dr. Jeffrey Gardere. He's going to be speaking with me about COVID-19 and mental health. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues, the crisis is causing many to experience anxiety when it comes to the health of themselves and loved ones. There's also a feeling of uncertainty for many who are facing financial struggles. With around-the-clock news coverage about the coronavirus and the rising number of cases, experts say taking care of mental health should be a priority, and we welcome you to today's episode. Still working from home. I know I said that every episode, but I'm just kind of emphasizing the fact that I am working from home, just to let everybody know that I'm practicing safe social distancing and doing the right thing, and I hope that you are too. Today's show is very special. We're going to be discussing something that really has been touched on somewhat in the news, but we're really going to talk about it here, and that's the issue of mental health. I know that a lot of people are just dealing with so much right now. You know, the saying is, when it rains, it pours, and so you have people who are dealing with the fears of catching COVID-19 or someone in their family getting it, on top of the whole concept of financial struggles. So when you mix all that together, it can certainly make for a disastrous situation, and we really want to give people the tools that they need to deal with it mentally. And so hopefully, he will, Dr. Jeffrey Gardere is going to talk to us about that and give us some tools on that. Have to talk about an upcoming story that we have in this week's edition of the Amsterdam News that's going to be coming out on Thursday. It's going to be on newsstands and on our website, and we're doing a really big story about the blacks in COVID-19 and how there are certain mechanisms out there that are discriminating against African Americans. If you don't know, a lot of news has been going on. Well, not a lot, but it's been some news happening, seeing that African Americans are being impacted by COVID-19 more than any other group. And so we're definitely going to be discussing and highlighting that. Stefan Johnson, one of our writers, is working on that story, and he's going to have that out on Thursday. So we definitely hope that you can look it up on amsterdamnews.com or on newsstands. Just a quick note, the city just came out with a map. The Department of Health came out with a map of how COVID-19 is impacting different zip codes. And if you look at that map, we actually have it on our website at amsterdamnews.com. Look in our news section, and it talks about this particular issue that we're talking about. And it's the fact that COVID-19 is more prevalent in communities of color and low-income communities. And so we definitely want to get to the bottom of that. And there's a very, very big push right now to get the racial numbers out there to let people know how this COVID-19 pandemic is impacting the black community. So we just, people are asking for those numbers. Also, another quick note, the podcast is now on some new platforms. Just want to give that information to you. So you can now hear this podcast on Deezer, Podcast Addict, and Podchaser, I think is what it's called. I might have that wrong, but we'll fix it. I think it's, Podchaser. And we definitely hope that you listen to us on there. And you can still listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. Well, my guest today is psychologist Dr. Jeffrey Gardere, who is going to be speaking with me today about mental health and COVID-19. Dr. Jeff is an associate professor and course director of behavioral medicine at Touro College. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Gardere. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being on the show. Well, I'm so glad that you're here. You're in my opinion, the most respected psychologist in the nation right now. And of course, with everything that's going on, we definitely need your expertise. We're being bombarded every day with numbers, with deaths, with disease. People are getting it, and there's a lot of anxiety going on. Tell us your idea of what's going on here when it comes to mental health and COVID-19, and how do we cope with it?
Well, there are a lot of things happening. I believe that most of us are experiencing either acute stress disorders or post-traumatic stress disorder, or if we had a pre-existing mental health issue, it's that much worse. But primarily, we are experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, some depression from manifest itself physically through headaches and stomach aches and other body aches, fatigue, eating issues, sleep dysregulation, emotionally, again, the anxiety, the depression, nightmares, flashbacks, all of the things that we see with PTSD. But it seems it's very difficult to just give blanket advice these days as to what people can do other than the standard things that we say when it comes to dealing with major traumas. But this is uncharted territory. But for most people, they need to stay in contact with others, especially with the social isolation and self-quarantining and staying in shelter. They can do that, their telephone and social media, of course. It's important for them to be able to communicate with other members as to what it is that they're experiencing rather than staying silent and letting that, internalize and hurt them in many ways. It's also important that they reach out and speak to mental health professionals, and they can do that right now as we speak by going online. There's a proliferation of now counseling sites that people can talk to someone. If someone is going through domestic violence, they can connect with domestic violence hotlines and still call 911. And I think physically, now more than ever, people need to take themselves, exercising, home, of course, getting good sleep if they can, eating regular meals, and keeping their routines the same as before they left work or school, which is waking at the same time every morning, going to bed at the same time every night, the way they once did before this pandemic, and taking their vitamins, staying on their medications, eating regular meals, regular healthy meals, and not overdoing it on the alcohol or other substances.
Okay. And I guess one of the main things that people are most anxious about, most the fear that they have is, oh my God, I'm going to get COVID-19, or somebody that I know and care about is going to get COVID-19, and something bad's going to happen. What do you do about those feelings? Because we're seeing all this in the news. We're hearing about the symptoms. I know for me, if I have a cough, I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And you kind of get that anxiety if it's the start of something. How do we quell those fears about possibly having it? Or if we have it now, some people have fears. What do we do about that?
Well, it's important that try to keep the fear low, because when the fear level is high, and it's a great question, Josh, what we tend to see is that we're stuck in the fight or flight mode of our bodies, that it releases adrenaline and neurotransmitters and other things that gear us up for action, but the body can't sustain that over a long period of time. So the fear of the COVID-19 is something that we need to work with. And look, the bottom line is this: we control everything that's going on in the world, but we can at least try to control what goes on in our own life. And following the CDC recommendations, right? What scientists are telling us, the ice if we can, quarantining if we have to, if we've been exposed, we feel that we have symptoms that are not serious enough to get to the hospital. If we have to, then go to the hospital. Social distancing, staying in shelter, all of those things we see are starting to flatten the curve. So it's washing our hands, not touching our faces, all the hygiene procedures that have been imparted to us. If we can do those things, at least we can have some semblance of control where we minimize the possibility of COVID-19 exposure. But look, if we're looking for complete invincibility or invulnerability, then we're barking up the wrong tree. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what brings on some paranoia. We can only do the best that we can possibly do, and then the rest of it is faith, hoping we are lucky enough to get through this, not attracted, and the people around us who do, making sure that they're taken care of and that they're loved, and that we try to pull them through as quickly as possible.
Okay. during times like this, people who have recovered from alcohol addiction, tobacco addiction, or any other drug addiction, this time can be particularly hard for them because a lot of times when things get stressful, addicts or former addicts can indulge into some of their addictions. What would you say to somebody, or just people in general, who are saying, you know what, this is getting too hard for me. I need a cigarette to calm me down. I need a drink to calm me down. Or I need these drugs to kind of calm me down. What do you say to folks who are battling with that?
Well, again, another question. I think when we look at people who don't have any true addictions, people who drink in moderation and so on, we see that they're drinking more. This is unprecedented, this pandemic, what we're going through in modern. And I think a lot of people perhaps have been overdoing it. And I would say to those folks, be careful. If this is a regular pattern of drinking or indulging in any substances, try not to fall into that mind frame. There are other things that you can do, including the exercise, including staying in moderation, including talking to others, including meditation, including exercise, getting fresh air, and so on. For those who have addiction issues, this is a very perilous time. You are right on with that. And I will tell those folks they need to be even much more diligent as to falling back in old behaviors in order to deal with stress and anxiety or possible depression. So stay in contact with sponsors. Make sure they're talking to professionals who help them or can help now. Form an informal network if they have to, setting up their own 12-step programs. And I would imagine the 12-step programs are probably online now. So it's important that they fortify themselves as much as possible because they're going to be more at risk than anyone else.
I do want to talk about another area that you spoke about, and that was for a lot of people that do live alone and don't have children. They live by themselves, and they are dealing with that isolation, especially some of our older folks who are living alone. I know you touched on it before, but I want you to kind of emphasize how do you avoid that feeling of isolation? And I know you mentioned that doing the phone calls helps. Can you talk a little more about that, about the isolation?
It's very important. We do have a lot of elders, for example, who have sort of been in their isolation, whether in nursing homes or whether living alone for quite some time, because the kids have fled the roost, if you will, the nest. And so it's really important for the people who are living alone, whether elders or not. I have several friends who've been single for quite some time. These are the people who are calling other people. They're staying on the telephone. They are going on to social media. They are connecting with other people, of course, with social distancing, being able to say hello or taking walks from a distance with one another. But those people really need to connect as much as possible because that isolation, as we see, is actually maybe some of the suicide. So those people who have been alone, let's make sure that they don't. Josh, you know, it's really interesting. Mm-hmm. I hate cell phones. I hate talking on the telephone. Wow. Yeah, I've always hated talking on the telephone. I like talking to people in person. Yeah. But in this new age, with this pandemic, I'm on the phone all the time, checking with friends, just having conversations. And I used to give advice to people. Social media will get you isolated. Social media won't teach you interpersonal skills. Guess what? The worm has turned, and now we are relying on social media and the cell phones to stay connected with everyone. So I think that's a valuable lesson for us to learn.
Absolutely. Now, on the flip side of that, there are people who are living in the same house. It might be a couple, it might be a family. And let's be honest, there are some people who are living together. They're not usually around each other that much, and it's causing a little bit of tension. You see people making jokes on like Facebook, like, "Oh, my kids are driving me crazy," and they're joking. But in some situations, there might be some cabin fever going on where people are just getting on each other's nerves. But I know you deal with a lot of family and relationship issues. How do you deal with that with people in the household? There might be some tension going on because people are around each other so much. What do you say about that?
It's that people are going to feel irritated and they may get into arguments or fights that they haven't got before, or more than they have because of the cabin fever, because of being together, and we're not used to that. But I think over time, as we go through this, people will appreciate more. I know I certainly do. I seeing my kids every day through the day, something I haven't done in 45 years.
Yeah.
So it's just an amazing thing to me. 30 years. It feels like 40 now.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that this is a time for us to step up. So where we might have been quick to react, where we might have been very aggressive about saying something that might be hurtful to someone else, we need to understand that we are all going through it. We are all suffering. We are all experiencing unprecedented stress. So it's important that we be as mindful as possible to the people that we are with, be as kind as we can to them. And even where we see something that might set us up because it's so bothersome, really just biting our tongues and thinking about what we want to say and what we want to do so that we do the right thing. Because a really simple argument is not going to, you're not going to have the escape of running out of a house and going someplace else.
Right.
We are locked down together.
One of the things that I keep seeing, and this was actually a recommendation from the CDC, is to take breaks from watching, reading, and listening to the news, and that includes social media. And I addressed this earlier at the top of the podcast about seeing the news stories, because we're seeing this all the time. How important is that to take breaks? Because here's the thing, we need to not see we have to watch the news so we know what's going on, because everywhere you look, there's a new instruction, new direction, new policy, new executive order. But how do we not allow that to overwhelm us? Because I'll be honest, I work in news, and I'll be honest, I do feel a certain kind of way when they start saying, oh, like they made a huge announcement today saying that this is the week where lives are going to change. And I think it's a little bit overdramatic, but it might be true. But we hear lines like that, and it just triggers like, okay, this might be we just think the worst. But how do we deal with hearing those news stories, seeing those social media? And the funny thing about social media is a lot of the stuff on there, of course, is not true. And so I know, and a lot of people know how to decipher fake news from real news, but some people don't. So what's your advice for, dealing with the news and dealing with how media is covering COVID-19?
Well, I think it's really important that we do stay informed, because there is a good information that's out there. I think we should consider the source of the information, not that it may be inaccurate, but sometimes the news is personality driven, and there may be a certain political bend to it, if you will. So it's important that you try to find news sites that perhaps are as neutral as possible, and they are out there, and the truth can hurt, but they do tell the truth. And the other part of that is to get your information in doses. I find it's helpful for me, and I've advised my patients, when you get up in the morning and have your coffee or what have you, get your information, read your newspaper, go online, listen to whatever program where you get your news. And then you get an update at some point in the afternoon or early evening. But whatever you do, don't watch the news before you go to bed, because that will be the stuff
before
of
you
night.
go to bed, you say. Okay.
Right, before you go to bed. I see people they just cannot sleep. And it's not about an exaggeration of news. It's the reality. Number of people who are exposed, have the cases of COVID-19, or who have died from the illness. And right before going to bed, watching news is not a good idea. This is the time maybe to just read a book, or read a holy book, or meditate, or spend the time with the family, but nothing that can be so affecting to your emotional state.
Right. And I can honestly say for me, I practice that because, I work in news, so I kind of have to know what's going on, and I kind of take it in doses. So my routine for the news is I watch it in the morning to see what's going on, and then throughout the day, maybe once or twice, I just have to see where the numbers are, what's new, and I just, I don't even, I think without realizing it, I do that myself, not reading the news at night. I want to talk to you about youth, children and teens, because can be also a confusing and scary time for children with everything that they're hearing. How do we explain to children? How do we keep them calm? How do we there was a story that came out today saying that COVID-19 is hitting teenagers really hard when it comes to the mental health aspect. Obviously, they're on social media seeing things, on their phones, on the computer, whatever. And of course, they're dealing with the concept and idea of, well, not even concept, it's happening, of doing homeschooling, and they're not seeing their friends. How do we explain this and guide our children and our teens through this process?
First and foremost, it's important that we know what it is that they know. Where is their knowledge level? What are the things that perhaps may be causing them stress or anxiety? Because most kids that I know, you ask them 19 right up until they're, the teenagers, their answer, it's a stock answer, whatever. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. Well, thanks. You were the ones who helped something like this happen, the way you treated the earth. So they may not be as open to discussing it. Okay. And that's why it's important that we meet them where they are. And it's not one situation type of talk, something where you talk with them out the day, neutral questions as to how they're doing, asking them about what the future may be, but having very positive conversations, not the conversations I sometimes see adults have, like, this is terrible, this is dooming, how could this happen to us, this is the fault of, lack of leadership and perhaps government, so on. What our kids really want to know is, do we believe in them? Do we love them?
Okay.
Are we trying to keep them safe? Those are the things that they really want to know and what we're going to do. So we have to have a positive attitude when we're talking with our kids, because we will model for them how they handle this situation with COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. And I just, we'll wrap up here shortly, but I did want to ask you, there are a lot of first responders and medical workers and doctors who are really going through this because they're working long hours, they're seeing a lot, and they feel so overwhelmed. What's your message to our first responders on self-care and how they should, be dealing with this right now? Because a lot of them are just really going through it with what's going on in our hospital and healthcare systems.
Absolutely, including essential workers and so on. Look, it just seems that in some parts of the country, even some parts of the tri-state area, have the protective equipment they need. And even with the protective equipment, they are putting themselves right in the sight of danger, right in the line of danger, because they can still contract it somehow. Accident, or whatever the case may be. So, first of all, we salute them. They are
Absolutely.
our new superheroes,
yes,
but they are not superhuman. So as much as possible, the organizations that put them out there have to support them, make sure that they get enough time off to rest, make sure that they are compensated in the proper way, forgive their student loans if they've had any, because they're putting themselves in danger each and every day. Let them know how much we appreciate them. Here's the predictions, Josh. Mm-hmm. Number one is that we have Veterans Day. There will be a holiday at some point recognizes first responders, medical personnel, essential workers. Okay? Yes. Will be that holiday. The second thing is, I believe medical PA schools, other types of medical type schools will be free in the future if they expect medical graduates and so on, doctors, nurses, and on and on and on, nurse practitioners to the front lines and deal with viruses. And then here's the third thing I would predict is we are going to see people like you and other incredible broadcasters, people in the media and so on, will be having perhaps nervous breakdowns in the future because you guys are also on the front line with this information. Often our reporters, our broadcast journalists are not afforded the opportunity to debrief and talk about their own post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's a cautionary tale and something that I would advise everyone in your profession do, as well as our first responders, medical people, and so on. Allow them the psychological treatment to deal with what they have had to do, what they put themselves in harm's way to do in order to keep us all safe and informed.
Thank you for that. Final words as we get through this. I mean, we're hearing some of the worst news that we're getting ready to approach the apex here in New York City, and we're going to be seeing a lot of things in the news and just even within our neighborhoods and some people even in our own homes. What are your final words about mental health when it comes to COVID-19?
Well, things look like they are going to hit the apex soon, and I think it's important than anything. People know that it's not just the physical effects of COVID-19, but it's the societal and the mental health aspects. So now more than ever, all the advice I gave, keeping yourself strong emotionally and physically, that is paramount at this point because there is much more as far as fear that we're going to see, but we all have to stay and know that we will get through this, not to be free, but it'll be complete change in our society for the simple fact that we will have to deal with whatever the next great epidemic or pandemic will be. So this is not the end. This is just the beginning as far as finding the best in ourselves, looking for our finest hour, but also preparing what comes in the future. We've got to be better prepared than we were this time.
I totally agree. Well, listen, thank you, Dr. Gardere. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Josh.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the local media association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work of chronicling the life of blacks in New York and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News to donate.